After talking to many product developers at the Velofolis fair, it became very clear that bicycle brands have finally stepped on the gas in developing their 32-inch mountain bikes. The plan is very clear. In 2026, prototypes at the World Cup. In 2027, commercialization begins, and in 2028, the Olympic Games should already be taking place. With these new bikes, but no longer as prototypes, rather as production models that we should all be able to find in stores to buy. Exactly the moment we're in, and from the end user's perspective, does it feel like this evolution to 32-inch mountain bikes is more of an industry need to get sales moving again? In a field where things have been gradually declining for years, but not significantly. A request from the end user, well, with the goal of shedding some light on all these shadows, I've recorded this video with a bicycle engineer who is going to help us understand what technical challenges they're facing right now. Throughout all this development, you won't find this type of content on any other channel. You won't have seen it in official media outlets. It's highly technical content that will help you understand many of the concepts surrounding the 32-inch wheels. For this reason, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and above all, to stay until the end of the video to listen. A reflection I want to share with you because I believe the end user is not fully understanding what their position is and what their goal is. Decision-making power. Regarding all this evolution, let's go for it full throttle. Let's start with a very important note. In recent weeks, several very small niche brands have already come to market with their proposals. 32 inches, in our opinion, this does not validate the concept at all. In fact, both the 32 inches and even the 36 inches, they've been on the market for years, especially from brands that try to meet the needs of very tall cyclists. We're talking about people who are 2 meters tall or more. And as I said, in our opinion, the industry will start to validate this concept when major brands like Canyon, Scott, Trek and Specialized launch their own 32-inch models for sale. Not just when it comes to bike brands, but especially when it comes to component brands. Because you'll see in today's talk that a big part of the technological challenge lies there. In the forks, in the wheels, in the tires. So without further delay, let's talk with Anton Sia, our independent bike engineer, and let's start by asking him about one of the things that seems most obvious, which is that people who are 1.90 meters tall or above will probably feel more comfortable on 32-inch bikes. But what about those of us with more average heights, 1.80 meters, 1.75 meters, 1.65 meters? What about the women? Yes, it's possible, but there are nuances in the end. The geometries of bikes can be analyzed from two perspectives for each measurement, from an ergonomic point of view or from a right feeling point of view. Of course, from an ergonomic point of view, yes, you can. In the end, you have certain objectives. Where is the reach, which is the distance from the bottom bracket to the head tube or whatever, or the stack? And so for a given size, you have those objectives and you figure out how to achieve them. The other thing is what compromises are going to be made in terms of the right feeling to achieve those objectives. So answering the question, is it possible to target small sizes? Yes, and ergonomically you have to meet those requirements, because if not, they stop being small sizes. But the question and the deeper analysis will come from with what consequences in the right feeling. It's clear that all of us will be able to get on and pedal a 32-inch bicycle. But now, those of us who wear size L, M, S or extra small, are we really going to feel better on a 32-inch bike? Until we try it, we won't be able to clear up that doubt. That being said, the geometries are also going to change radically. So let's ask Anton, which part of the bike is going to be most affected and what consequences will that have? There are several, but the clearest and most noticeable one is the stack. And in fact, as a consequence of this, that's why we see these ultra inverted stems. What is the stack? To remind you, it's the measurement that goes from the bottom bracket to the top of the head tube, and it gives you an idea of how tall the bike is. How do you position yourself on a cross-country racing bike? You want the stack to be very low, so you can be more tucked in and so on. In any case, this stack measurement increases a lot. An average of about 50 millimeters and 50 millimeters, just so people can visualize it. It's the spacers we put on the headset, the thick 10 millimeter ones. Five. Is that brutal? Yes, it's a lot. And that's why we see on trail bikes some ultra inverted stems, which in the collective imagination are ultra racing cross country stems. Okay, but why does the stack grow? For two reasons, actually three. First, there's a measurement on the bike called the bottom bracket drop, which is the bottom bracket drop, and it measures the distance between the bike's axles, how much lower the bottom bracket is. Since the wheels are taller, the bottom bracket drop also has to be lower. This is the first measurement that causes the stack to increase. The second one is called axle to crown in English, which is the measurement from the front wheel axle to the fork crown. So we have a lower bottom bracket drop and a higher fork crown. And then there's the head tube length, which can be lowered. And this is where the key comes into understanding why the stack gets out of control. On 32 wheels, the head tube can be smaller than 90, 85. If you push me to be within regulations, 90. So if we could make head tubes of 50, 40 millimeters, it would be balanced, but we can. Why? Because such short head tubes suffer structurally. In fact, remember, how did tapered forks come about? What are tapered forks? It's a larger diameter of the lower headset bearing, and that's done to achieve stiffness. Well, then, after this explanation, one consequence that 32-inch wheels can have on geometry and standards is that they can, in quotes, create a small gap. Incremental disruption in this area of the bike is about finding a fork standard that fits in shorter head tubes. What for? To compensate for this excessive stack on the bike, this uncontrolled stack with 32-inch wheels, and to avoid these, for me, such a terrible design is the ultra inverted stems, because in the end, an ultra inverted stem is just a patch. That is, the handlebar should be here, but because of standards, because of stiffness limits, I have to make a patch to put them where they naturally were. It's clear that geometry must adapt, but what about the kinematics, and especially the suspension travel? Will we return to 100 millimeters of travel? The kinematics of a bike are, let's see, not 100% independent because they're related to the bike's architecture. But if you want a specific behavior from any of the three main curves analyzed in bikes, such as anti-squat, anti-rise, and leverage ratio, are you going to be able to achieve them in the same way you did with 29-inch wheels? The fact of putting on bigger wheels doesn't change these parameters at the kinematic level. The only thing that can happen, and it's a bit indirect, is that because of the larger wheel volume on smaller sizes, the travel might be limited simply because the wheel doesn't fit. So to use all the travel, it would either hit the seat or the seat tube. But this is, yes, it's kinematics, but kind of a secondary effect in the end. For example, a 32 bike can be progressive, regressive, or linear. The leverage ratio doesn't change just because it's a 32. I mean, a kinematic can be done just as well or poorly, or achieve the desired goals regardless of the wheel diameter. And as for suspensions, the travel is going to be reduced because with a larger wheel diameter, it seems logical to think that the wheel is going to absorb most of the impact, especially the tire. And maybe we no longer need 120 millimeters of travel for cross country. Yes, that's another thing. Yes, it could be that the absorption capacity of the 32 wheels means that the 120 millimeters are no longer necessary, maybe, but that's already an indirect consequence. I mean, from a kinematic point of view, when you design something, you can achieve the same parameters with 29-inch wheels, 32-inch wheels, or 26-inch wheels. Another thing is the ride feeling these wheels give me. Does it make this type of kinematics necessary? Maybe not, right? But whatever the answer is, as a designer, you can adjust. Adjust, for example, if we want to do something, address a topic, maybe a niche one, for example. The topic of travel depends a lot on the axle path in Spanish. That would be good. On the path that the wheel takes and the trajectory that the rear wheel draws, especially throughout the travel. For example, in high pivot bikes, the trajectory tends to go from front to back. In other words, when the bike compresses, it gets longer, and that makes the wheel naturally tend to move away from the frame. So in that case, the travel isn't affected that much, but well, you have to see, huh? You have to see. I mean, just relate the increase or decrease in travel with the axle path, which has an effect on the wheel diameter, make this connection. But now we're getting into very specific cases that, when speaking generally, become blurred. We'll have to look at each case, each bike, each kinematic, each briefing, each one individually. Precisely, this is one of the most interesting parts when it comes to development, when it comes to putting each brand's DNA into it. No, because as users or as fans of this world, with each launch, we can pay close attention to see how and which path each of the brands has taken. Yes, absolutely. In the end, the same question you're asking me will be asked by the developers at the brands, and they'll have their own way of answering it. There will be different perspectives, and from this answer will come the narratives with which the 32 bikes will be launched. So, yes, yes, absolutely. We need to pay attention since they're not explained at every launch. Another topic that's being talked about a lot has to do with the transmissions. They're going to be affected. We're going to have to use a much smaller chainring since we're going to have a much bigger wheel. For example, let's take the case of a bike going at 20 km H1 with 29-inch wheels and one with 32-inch wheels, the one with 32. In terms of revolutions, it's a bit slower because the wheel rotation is bigger. Do you mean, yes, the wheel rotation, the revolutions per minute of a 29 and a 32 bike wheel? At the same speed, the wheel spins just a bit slower, and that little difference makes it more or less. If a rider normally uses a 36 tooth chainring, the equivalent would be a 34 tooth one. If someone uses a 34 tooth, then a 32 tooth, that you go down this step of two teeth, this is the maximum. Anything else would be different. But this brings us back indirectly to the conclusion about the 32 tooth chain rings. I don't know if that's how you say it, but the conclusion is that the Super Boost axle and the Super Boost standard are the most suitable. In the end, Super Boost, if I'm not mistaken, gains 9 millimeters in the wide wheel, and in these 9 millimeters, part of it can go to make the spoke umbrella wider for stiffness. Also, a few more millimeters are left to fit a wider cassette body, which can hold 13 speeds. And yes, 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 there are a lot of assumptions, but well, there could be a small change there, but in any case, it would be a change resulting from the search for stiffness in the wheels. That's a much bigger issue. If there's something the engineers working at the bike brands to develop the 32-inch concept are telling me these days, they're facing two handicaps unrelated to themselves and entirely tied to the component brands. On one hand, it's very difficult to find components today that are specifically developed for 32 inches, and on the other hand, the few that do exist. We're mainly talking about forks, wheels, and tires. They don't manage to satisfactorily pass the field test when it comes to structural rigidity and their resistance to fatigue. Engineers I've been in contact with throughout this process that the brands are carrying out. If there's one thing they've made clear to me, it's that in this prototyping phase, they're running into a lot of difficulties regarding structural rigidity, especially of the elements that make up the wheel. Many spokes are breaking during testing, and they're having a lot of problems with the hubs. It's hard to keep the tires in place when a skilled rider gets on, making the bike go at a good speed, leaning well through the curves and so on. It seems that the tires can't hold up, they come off the rim or even end up tearing. But not because of a rock, but because of the structure, because of the sidewall's ability to hold itself up. So, how critical is all this going to be in the evolution of the 32? Of course, it can happen. For example, if you take the same design of a 29-inch wheel and just adapt it to a 32, you get these kinds of things. And this, for example, this example is fantastic. You know, when we ask brands for responsibility, not to just because of commercial pressures, make a simple adaptation of what was being done with 29-inch wheels to 32-inch wheels. Earlier, we saw it with the example of the head tube. We need smaller head tubes to keep the stack in check, and we need wheel stiffness adapted to the same size. And it's not enough to just do a copy paste with adaptations of what was being done before in the end. 32 wheels in certain areas of the bike are going to have their own idiosyncrasies and their own idiosyncrasies. That means custom solutions for the requirements of 32 wheels, not adaptations that just check the box, because the bike pedals, it rolls. What you're asking for is basically, if we think back to skip over that whole phase that happened when we went from 26 to 28, the 27 and a half, somewhere around there, causing a bit of trouble. That's when the bigger wheels came out, the 29-inch ones, but the geometry was still really for the 26-inch wheels. A few years later, things evolved and changed. Then it turned out that the 26 axles didn't work for the 29-inch wheels. That's why they switched to boost, given everything we're discussing. And it felt like there were a few years when it seemed like the brands had released a product that wasn't fully mature, and then it was the customer who had to keep covering the costs. I mean, buying one model after another because everything was just updates. So now that we have more technology, are the factories also able to evolve much faster? Maybe the smart or most sensible thing would be for brands to release a product that's already 100% mature. There's always room for improvement as products evolve and we learn from releasing them to the market. But is it worth waiting a little longer and not rushing, as Anton says, so that later the consumer doesn't have to pay the price for each of the product's evolutions? And being up to date by selling a bike just to buy another one. Absolutely, absolutely. For example, let's see at the development level, in quotes, it's relatively easy to make a bike with 32-inch wheels because you take what you already have from the 29-inch and adapt it. For example, remember with the EMC prototype, we see it in the fork. They take a 29-inch fork and make some completely prototype extenders for the fork. They adapt it. It's about taking what they have and adapting it to the new thing. And that's the easy part. It's the easy and necessary part because you adapt, test, see, and keep checking. But then you have to keep moving forward and then see which areas on the bike need solutions specific to the 32-inch wheels. In this conversation, and you don't need to be a genius, we found two, the head tubes and the diameter of the rear wheel. There will surely be more. And later in this question, I'm asking myself, there will surely be more. Also, let's put ourselves in the brand's shoes a bit because, for example, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but I want to share this point of view. You, as a brand, when do you validate a bike, for example? When it pedals, like it pedals and doesn't fall apart after 10 meters? Right? Maybe a bit more, but for example, you have this prototype, it works, and there's a series of steps to where you want to go. There are a series of problems that you can't anticipate as a brand and that you only see as you go. Unfortunately, when, for example, you see that a certain part has a 50% warranty return rate, then you have a problem. Maybe it's a problem that no matter how many safeguards you put in place, you weren't able to foresee or encounter. So is it a balance? I'm the first one who doesn't want the consumer to pay the price for development, but sometimes it just can't be any other way. I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for this, but oh well. It's just a point of view, it's a point of view. I think, Anton, that people, just like we've said one thing, we can say the other. I mean, just like we try to defend, when discussing the consumer, you also need to consider the brand's perspective. And even thinking in a Machiavellian way, imagine with the whole issue of the axes that there are a brand that right now says, I've already done the full development of the 32 and says, I know perfectly well that the new 32 with a super boost axle would work better than with a boost. But hey, I'm going to release it with boost because that way in 2 years I'll release the super boost and I force everyone to change their bike again. But what happens if 10 other brands are at the same point and say, no, no, we're going to release the Super Boost? What would happen to the one that was scheming to release the boost? Then in 2 years, blah, 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 blah. It eats up all the stock because people are going to buy the ones that already have the Super Boost. I mean, many times the consumer feels like the industry is just one and that all the brands are working together. And they call each other and say, hey, let's all stick with Boost, and in 2 years we'll come out with Super Boost. But no, it's not a world of piranhas. If someone sees an opportunity and commercially they're going to do better by adopting a technology before everyone else is willing or able to do it, they're going to do it. And if that's going to reduce the sales of a competing brand, go ahead with it. I mean, brands also take a lot of risks in that sense. There's an issue that's the big elephant in the room, which is the weight increase. I'm not just talking about the overall weight of the bike, but the increase in weight on the outer part of the wheel. That's something we bikers always want to avoid. Because the more weight there is on the outer part of the wheel, the more the rotational mass will increase. And this, as I said, is completely negative. Look, the overall weight will most likely increase, but the point is to see where if we look only at the frame, there's no reason why a frame for 32-inch wheels should be heavier nor lighter. I mean, in some areas it does end up being a bit heavier, but in others it makes up for it. That remains to be seen, but there's nothing to suggest that the frame has to be either heavier or lighter. Now, total weight. Why do we say yes? It's going to increase a bit because of the wheels, and as you said, the wheels are necessarily going to be heavier. The tires are necessarily going to be heavier. That is, the total wheel is going to increase in weight in the area that's usually said to be worse, which is on the outside. Why is it said to be worse? Because inertia will increase. And what is inertia? Inertia is basically the ability of an object to change its state, that is, to accelerate or to brake. So if a wheel has more inertia, you need more energy to accelerate, and you also need more energy to brake in terms of acceleration. Who is it not going to matter to? To the pros or to regular people? That is very strong because it already has enough strength to accelerate the bike the way he wants, and he'll also have it with the 32C. And in terms of braking, well, it's also true that brakes nowadays are potentially powerful, so there won't be a problem with that. But to sum up, in terms of weight, it looks like it might be a little higher. And where? Because of the increased weight of the wheels, which is going to change the bike's dynamics due to this increase in wheel inertia. And I'll add a little thing that the top of the line models have, because whenever we think about a weight increase, we're always thinking about the top of the line. I've talked to some engineers who told me no. It could be that the weight increase is maybe only between 500 and 800 grams, but in a top of the line model, of course, those 500, I think this is really 500 grams or 800 grams, is very good to speak very positively about that increase, which might turn out to be something more. But if we go down the range, there are currently 29-inch bikes with single pivot systems, nothing complex, no dual linkages or anything like that. In aluminum, that literally weigh 14 and a half kilos. If we go up to 32 inches, we're talking about those bikes easily weighing maybe 16 kilos because the range of the wheels is lower. the tires are lower end, and the frame had to be reinforced somewhere. If we keep going up and want to avoid reaching aluminum, we must continue upward. Let's go to a 5,000 euro range where maybe right now you have a 12 kilo bike, but you could easily have one that's 13 and a half in one body, pushed by another that's not in great shape. Supposedly, someone who doesn't have as much physical ability, who doesn't have as much technical skill to avoid braking as much as the professionals do. So that's where I see an increase in weight that will really work against the user of that type of bicycle. What you're saying, I totally agree, but let's go back to what we were saying before. The scenario for the introduction of 32 bikes is not defined. And maybe what you're saying is the argument that makes 32 wheels stay in a niche. And what will that niche be? The top of the line cross country competition bikes that are going to be for sale, yes, but maybe only with the top model and just one because it has to be available for sale. The bike that a racer uses to compete in the Olympic Games has to be available for sale, so they release that top of the line model, just one build, and it stays niche. That's in high level competition. Precisely because it turns out that making entry-level bikes with 32-inch wheels for a wide range of riders does more harm than good. I hope that with all this, you've been able to get a good dose of technical arguments to counter those know-it-alls at the bar, just saying things without much sense. But before finishing, I want to share that reflection I promised you at the beginning and allow me to include myself in the group of end user bikers because I really consider myself one of you because I understand that many of you may feel that bicycle brands, at some point, they all gathered in a secret place in a dark cave to agree on a devious plan to make wheels 32 inches so that we will all be forced to change our bikes. This wasn't the case, but I understand that some people feel that way. And I really want to assert the real position and the real power that the end users have when it comes to innovations or evolutions like this. And the truth is, no matter how much the brands want to make their proposals, and they will make their proposals. When it comes to 32 inches, we are the ones who will have the final say. And sometimes when I read the comments you leave on the videos I upload talking about 32 inches, I feel like everything is already done. There's no going back and nothing we can do. Hey, is the real day gonna be when the stores open their shutters full of 32-inch bikes? If we, the end users, go en masse and buy them, we'll be validating the concept, even if it's not good for everyone. In the same way, if on the big day those stores open full of 32-inch bikes, we look at them, but we don't buy them. Even if the concept is better for most people, it won't move forward because commercially it won't have been successful. No matter how much engineers love the idea of moving to 32, no matter how much brands love the idea of boosting sales, and so on and so on. So what I mean by this is that during this window of time before these bikes hit the market, will you use it to really build a critical foundation based on technical reasoning? Okay, because actually having a broader technical knowledge of the mountain bike world is what it's based on, to stay away from both extremes of the know-it-all who hates everything new just because it's new and it's a change. And at the same time, it's going to save you from the marketing messages from the brands when these new models come out, telling you that it's the best bike you can buy. The only vaccine against these two issues is for you to really have more technical arguments. Why? Well, because the way I see it now, there's a lot of hate, a lot of misunderstanding. But I understand that there are people who really are knowledgeable and already have a solid technical background. But I think the vast majority in general can learn a lot about what a mountain bike is. How do the current 29 ears work? What can they really bring, both positive and negative, the 32-inch ones? And if you take that step back, are you introducing technical arguments within your knowledge? You wait for the brands to make their proposals, you analyze them with discernment, and then above all, you test the bike. I think that when it comes to deciding whether 32-inch wheels are really made for you or not, it's going to be a much more solid decision, and I don't know. I invite you to go through that small learning process. And I'm not saying you have to become an engineer, just to pay more attention to more detailed, more technical content, and not just stick to a few headlines and a few clickbaits, so that when the time comes, you really have that technical argument and you can debate both with the know it all and with the marketing people. What I can assure you is that both Anton and I are uploading this kind of content as information comes out, as we get news from within the industry, which isn't always public in other media and so on. We will be sharing it here, and especially when I have the chance to test production 32-inch bikes, well, as always, like I do with any other model. I'll be as critical as possible and try to share the information from one regular biker to another. That's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and comment. What do you think about 32-inch bikes? See you soon. Be happy, share the video with your biker friends, and don't forget, bye.